Hello all, and welcome to discussions on storytelling. So if you've noticed lately, animated films have become solely CG animated. From Disney to Pixar to DreamWorks to even independent studios, this just seems to be the norm nowadays. So why is this? Why is 2D animation left behind on television while 3D is dominant in all these movies? Not only that, but what about mediums such as stop motion or puppetry? Those are also amazing art forms that have produced wonderful and emotional stories. Why then is it so rare nowadays? Is it just a cost issue? Is 3D simply easier to use? Well, let's look at what each is capable of. Puppetry is the oldest out of any of these mediums, but really only in simply existing. When it comes to using it for films and shows, it started out being used to create visual effects for monsters or creatures back in the 50s and 60s. The practice was continued into films like Jurassic Park and Jaws. Yes, Jurassic Park also used 3D animation, but dinosaurs started as either practical or robotic puppets in those movies. So even when 2D and 3D animation came around, puppetry wasn't immediately abandoned, but rather combined with 3D animation to provide better illusions. There were still stories where puppets took the forefront, like Muppet and Sesame Street, but once animation rolled around, it was slowly beginning to decline. Stop motion has also been around for a while, but hasn't been used as often as the others. It's kind of the outlier. Like puppetry, it had been used in many films for visual effects, but it also had its own films with a unique style. These are films like Corpse Bride, Nightmare Before Christmas, Coraline, and Paranormal. These are films that are made solely through the method of slowly moving clay models one frame at a time, often requiring countless specially crafted facial expressions to switch through in the different frames. Consider how many expressions had to be swapped through, how many specially made faces had to be made for each character. This is easily the most tedious method of storytelling, which might explain why it's not used that often. Next up is 2D animation, or traditional animation, which has actually been around since the 1930s. This is when Fleischer Cartoons and Disney started to get their footing, with cartoons like Steamboat Willie. Technically, it's been around before puppetry, but only in terms of visual media such as films, TV shows, and shorts. Puppetry technically is older because it didn't require film or anything to be told. It usually was told on the stage. But again, we're talking about 2D animation right now. 2D animation is the practice of drawing a character over and over again by hand in ways that provide the illusion that the character is moving and acting on their own. It has a very distinct look and has been used in so many childhood-shaping films. Initially, they were forced to redraw everything in the frame, in every frame. Basically, any time the characters would move, they would be forced to redraw the entire scene. Then it began to evolve as studios created backgrounds to move so that they could save more time, adding sound to hear for the characters and eventually adding color. This is the method used for the films in the Disney Renaissance. These are the films like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and The Lion King. My point is that each of these art styles have their own uses and complications. Puppetry is wonderfully practical, but can be very expensive and hard to have look realistic, and not, well, ridiculous. 3D looks more realistic, but can often be overused in the modern day, even in films where it doesn't really need it. And I'm not just talking about the blockbuster films that overuse CGI effects. Stop motion is a wonderfully unique art form. I love it a lot, but it's so tedious that if even one frame isn't correct, you have to start all over again. This is the case with 2D as well, but it's even more ridiculous with stop motion because you have to get everything right the first time around, or you're going to have to move it up bit by bit over and over again. Back on track. So what's wrong with 2D animation? Other than the tediousness. Well, it has a lot to do with how it's seen. So many people dismiss 2D animation as a children's thing. To be fair, it was used in countless kids' films and has the ability to be far more cartoony than any of the other art forms. And Disney has only encouraged them, as they were the reigning champion of kids' content, and pretty much any kids' content was primarily animation, since it made it easier to entertain them. However, 2D animation is still accepted as a professional method of animation by many of them, including Japanese anime. You all knew this was coming. It's allowed to be more adult and mature than most 2D animation in America. While there are examples of American 2D films made that are far more mature than most, including The Brave Little Toaster, An American Tail, and even Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, they're outliers in America. Oh yeah, there's an animated Lord of the Rings movie, but that's not for right. To be fair, the others have assumptions made about them, too. Stop motion is assumed to be very unnerving and or strange, when there's plenty of potential for perfectly fine films. People have just been spoiled by the Rankin Bass Christmas films, I guess. 3D is assumed to be primarily for realistic-looking films, when they can make cute-looking films just as easily, or just make things that aren't realistic. CG isn't restrained to just making things so close to real life that you wonder why they didn't just do live action. Puppetry is assumed to be used to entertain babies and teach them letters and numbers, when they can be just as dramatic and emotional as modern films if they were allowed to be. Honestly, people really undermine puppetry when it can be used to address all sorts of mature issues. The thing is, some of the best movies, shows, etc. have been created by finding ways to combine the best traits of each of these art forms. Take the Paperman short film, for example. It's a beautiful and adorable love story that was made by combining 2D and 3D animation. Not only that, but the recent film The Bad Guys combined the two as well, leading to a wonderful animation style. Into the Spider-Verse is one of the best examples of combining the two, being honestly more visually stunning and interesting than pretty much any Marvel film that I've seen recently. As of making this video, there are only a few examples of combining puppets or stop motion with many of the other mediums, one of which being Gravity Falls' Clay episode. It really is unique in that it employed a lot of unique art forms, whereas most don't. I think the best way to progress with these mediums is to see how we can continue combining them to see what we get. They shouldn't be so distinct that we can't ever combine them. There should be gray areas between them. It would really help provide a better result. This method would ultimately provide avenues in which films and shows can evolve to a bizarre and unforgettable visual style, similar to the seemingly random style changes found in shows like SpongeBob and Flapjack. Style changes that may not have a ton of purpose, but provide them with a unique style that's replicated to this day. But one of the most important things here is that CG is not the only way to animate films nowadays, or even to just tell a story. Puppets and stop motion can provide certain visuals that CG would have more trouble with, even visuals that 2D animation can't do. For example, puppets can be used to provide an actual physical character for the actors to interact with, like how Pee Wee Herman had those strange characters, or like in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, when they actually had stuff get destroyed. Stop motion has only gotten better over the years, to the point that it's had its own homemade feel that can be used for more simple stories. That's really important nowadays in a film market where everything has to be multiversal end of the reality-ness. Nah. What I'm trying to say is, no medium of artistic expression in films, shows, whatever, should be ignored or abandoned or even overused. It'd be like abandoning the art of musical or non-musical theater because movies are able to be more special effects heavy. You're missing out on so much story potential that can only be found in that medium. Hashtag don't let theater die. Lastly, if you want to check out some great examples of these mediums being explored, look up some here on YouTube. Barnaby Dixon is an expert on puppetry, and his puppets push the boundaries of being simple fabric and plastic Sesame Street characters. They're amazing. In terms of 2D animation, there are at least a dozen, if not infinitely more independently made animated pilots for possible shows. All of them are really impressive and have so much potential. Let's not give up on CG though, either, since it, like the rest of these mediums, can be used for crazy impressive projects. Let's just not forget about any of them. Every one of them has its time and place.